Running Scared by Lynn Cook, Chapter 12. Lee was floating in the most wonderful dream. There were warm lips travelling down her throat, and she moaned at her enjoyment, rolling onto her back and allowing those lips better access. There were fingers running through her hair, and they moved her head slightly to the side to continue kissing on the other side of her neck. She entwined her fingers into a full head of hair, holding it to her, prolonging how it was making her feel. The lips went to pull away, but she wasn't ready to end this particular dream, so pulled them back towards her and felt arms go around her, pulling her away from the cushion she lay on, to be pressed against what felt like a warm, bare chest. All too soon those lips left her again, laying her back down, and she opened her eyes just a fraction. They shot wide open when she realised it was Greg sat on the edge of the bed smiling down at her. "Greg," she croaked. "Good morning, Angel. I'm sorry, were you expecting somebody else?" "What, She sat up slightly. "Don't worry," Greg smiled. "I'll give you a few minutes to get all caught up." Lee concentrated on making the wheels in her brain start turning. She looked around her, knowing it wasn't her room, so assumed it was Greg's. But what was she doing in it, in his bed? "Okay, think back," she schooled herself. There was a party. Giles acted like a dick. She ripped her dress. Greg saved her. They came up to his place and got drunk together. And, oh no, here it all came back, mental images filling her mind, try as she might to stop them. She lifted the quilt for confirmation, and yes, she was just in her underwear. She looked back up at Greg and cleared her throat. "Right. All caught up now?" he asked. Lee grinned tightly. "Inglorious Technicolor, thank you very much." "Freaking out yet?" He was sat on the edge of the bed beside her, wearing jeans but no top, and damp hair, having obviously just got out of the shower. She nodded. "You could say that." She covered her face with her hands and quietly screamed. Greg laughed and pulled her hands away. "What exactly is the problem here, Angel?" Lee raised her eyebrows. "You're kidding me, right?" Greg shrugged. Lee cleared her throat, knowing there was no other way out of this other than with brutal honesty. To joke it off as two adults, and with a bit of luck, managed to leave with the tiniest bit of dignity left. "What's the problem? Well, let me see." She ran her hands through her hair. "You know when you're having one of those really shitty nights, when nothing seems to go right? Well, I was having one of those. And my boss, who's this really scary guy, by the way, decided to save me. We went back to his place, had a few drinks, had a few laughs, you know how it goes. But then I thought it would be a really great idea to go to bed with him. I then, of course, turned into a wanton hussy and sexually abused him a little bit. And now I've woken up practically naked in his bed. But do me a favour, will you, and don't tell him that I told you." Greg chuckled and reached one hand over the other side of her and leant on it, bringing their faces closer together. "You absolutely fascinate me, Natalie Connor." "Oh yeah, I'm a real hoot," she said sarcastically, rolling her eyes. "I'm terribly sorry, Greg, for everything." Greg looked puzzled. "There's really no need, but just so as you know, your sorries need some work. They aren't nearly as impressive as your thank yous." Lee closed her eyes and could feel her cheeks burning. "You're really going to make me squirm for this, aren't you?" "I'm thinking about it," he said smugly. She smiled. "All tough, because I refuse. You were on the other end of all of that kissing and stuff, so why should I be the only one freaking out?" He leant his face closer to hers. "And what do you mean exactly when you say stuff?" Lee bit her bottom lip, and her cheeks burned again. "Not fair!" she screamed, and pushed him away, sitting up and holding the quilt to her chest. "Now lend me something to wear so I can get out of here." "Ah, running away again so soon, Miss Connor." Lee cleared her throat and shook her head. "Not at all, Mr. Phillips. I just don't want to outstay my welcome, and if you keep making me blush the way you are, you're going to give me a head rush or something." He smiled. "What can you expect? You did tell me I was an arse." "Greg, stop!" She blushed again, and without thinking, buried her face into his chest. As they made physical contact, they both fell silent. Very slowly, Greg moved his hand to hold her cheek and pulled her head back to look at him. His serious eyes went from hers to her lips, then back to her eyes again, and time seemed to stand still. He half smiled. "Personally, I think you're just not a morning person." He kissed her forehead and stood up, handing her the robe she'd had on the night before. "Coffee is what's needed here, I think. So meet me in the kitchen." It took everything he had to walk away from her at that moment. Every time he looked at her, his heart skipped a beat, and he just wanted to take her in his arms and never let her go. But he knew, for all of her bravado, she was way out of her comfort zone and scared to death, which made her unpredictable and likely to run out on him first chance she got. He would not make the same mistake he did a year ago by pushing her too hard. Lee didn't want to go traipsing around Greg's flat in nothing but a robe, but what choice did she have? To the best of her knowledge, her once beautiful, now ruined dress was still in the bathroom basin. Besides, she reasoned, things weren't the same now as the incident in New York. She was no longer a junior research assistant. She was a fully fledged consultant with a major client under her belt, so she could hold her own. At that point, her mind wandered to Julie and Donald and how their evening had developed. Not that Lee approved of mixing business with pleasure. A small laugh escaped her throat as she shook her head. Pot, kettle, black, she really was a fine one to talk. She was still smiling to herself when she entered the kitchen, having guessed its location correctly. It was much the same as the rest of the flat, very large, with every modern appliance and a large breakfast bar in the middle with tall stools all around it. Greg looked up and saw her smiling. "Well, you look happier already. Is that in anticipation of the coffee, or have you decided you suddenly find my company so compelling?" Her smile deepened. "Coffee, definitely the coffee. Take a seat and it will be ready in moments." She sat on one of the stools and took a deep breath, willing her courage not to leave her at the conversation she knew she must now have. Lee was also very grateful to notice that he had put a t-shirt on by now, as she really didn't need any more distractions. "Greg, we are okay, aren't we?" He stopped in mid-flow when reaching for the cupboard and turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it won't be weird between us now, will it? Just because we can just put it down to the heat of the moment, too many brandies and move on, right?" She tried to sound hopeful. Greg walked away from the counter and sat on the edge of the stool beside her. "Are you really worried about that? Me being weird with you?" Lee was willing every bit of nerve she had to come to her. "Well, last time we got a little carried away. You changed towards me, and for a while there, it was a bit weird, yes." Greg half smiled. "That wasn't weird you were seeing from me, Natalie. That was frustration." He leant across and rested his hand on her knee. "Don't worry. This time there will be zero weirdness." She smiled in relief. "Good. Now, are you going to be all day with that coffee, or what?" He chuckled as he got to his feet and continued with his task. "Of course, you might want to confirm that for yourself if you're worried, that is." She turned on a stool to face his back. "What do you mean?" "Well," he poured both coffees from the jug, then picked hers up and turned. "If you really wanted to assure yourself that things are okay between us, you could always—" He leant beside her, putting the coffee down, their faces 2 inches apart. "Spend the day with me." Lee could not help the shocked look appearing on her face. "What?" Then she relaxed. "Oh, I get it. This is another one of your little jokes. Or ha, very funny." Greg shook his head slightly. "It's not a joke. Spend the day with me." "Greg, no, that's a ridiculous idea." She gently pushed him aside as she reached for her coffee. He grabbed his own and sat beside her. "Tell me why." Let me see. Oh, yeah, that's right. You're my boss." He raised an eyebrow. I was your boss last night, but that didn't seem to stop us. Lee refused to blush. No, last night you were my knight in shining armour, remember? Today you're back to being my boss. I don't see what that has to do with anything, and why you see it as such a problem. Because it is a problem, a huge one. With the whole corporate mattress thing, it's unthinkable. He took hold of one of her hands. It would be unthinkable if that's what was happening here, but it's not. You're attracted to me, Natalie, and you know it. It's not because I'm your boss, and how being with me could further your career. Quite the reverse. You're attracted to me in spite of all that. And I'm attracted to you, Natalie, very attracted. And it has nothing to do with me pulling rank or shooting fish in a barrel. It's because of you, and I want to get to know you better. And I don't care what you do for a living, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. She squinted at him. For your information, Mr. Phillips, I have never started at 9 and finished at 5, and for me to work a 5-day week is a rare luxury. He smiled as he brought her hand to his lips. Then perhaps you should start. He kissed her fingers. Lee felt her whole body tremble. He looked back at her. Why do you always shake every time I come near you? Habit, she said blankly. He laughed. Tell me the real reason you don't want to spend the day with me. Lee knew there was no point in holding back. Certain things just had to be said, so they could put it all behind them and move on like two professional people. You may not like what you hear, and you're not allowed to get mad at me because you've asked me to be honest. I'm hearing no right now, and I don't like that in the least, so I don't really feel I have much to lose. And let's not pretend that you're worried about me being mad at you, Natalie. You've never been scared of me, so just say what you need to say. He released her hand and sat up straight. Treat this like you would any other negotiation meeting. Tell me your concerns, and we'll address them. She smiled. You're being serious? He nodded. Completely. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at her to continue. Okay, she cleared her throat. Now I'm probably going to blush profusely while I get through this, but you're not allowed to comment on it. Agreed? He nodded. Agreed. Right. Well then, here goes. She took a deep breath. I see you as the epitome of Jekyll and Hyde. You have this dual personality thing going on, and I never really know which one I'm going to face every time I see you. Now, on the one hand, you have Dr. Jekyll, who, you are completely right, I am attracted to. I love his company, I could talk to him for hours, and every time I look at him, I just want to rip his clothes off with my teeth. Lee could feel her cheeks burning, but carried on. On the other hand, you have Mr. Hyde, who is a complete anal retentive, a perfectionist of the highest order, who irritates the shit out of me, and whom I can't relax with for a single moment. She took a mouthful of her coffee. You see, Greg, I accept the fact that I am human, and by being so, am capable of mistakes. I am in no way perfect, and cannot imagine spending time with someone that would want me to be so. Your Hyde sets the bar far too high for me to even attempt. The trouble is, I can't spend time with one without running into the other. And as I've proved on a couple of occasions now, I can't trust myself around Jekyll. Because, as I've already said, I'm far too attracted to him because he's just so yummy and gorgeous. You know, if God gave me a pencil and said, draw me your perfect man, Jekyll would pretty much be the man who I would draw, if I could draw, that is, which I can't. And I'm just waffling now, but I think I've made my point very clearly, so now I'm just going to shut up. She sat back on her stool and took a mouthful of her coffee, pleased that she'd finally laid all her cards on the table. Greg raised his eyebrows. Finished? Lee nodded. Wow, he breathed. Good speech. Have you practiced that, or was it all off the cuff? She swallowed a mouthful of her coffee. I've said it to myself many times over, and it may have been a bit shaky on the dismount, although in my defence it was never intended for your ears. I bet, he sounded thoughtful. She looked at him over her coffee cup. So, are you mad now? Oh, yes, Natalie, a woman who has been the object of my desire for the longest time has just told me she wants to rip my clothes off with her teeth, and that part of me, at least, is her perfect man. So, yes, I'm furious. He stood up. Sorry, we will address all of your concerns in just a second, but I just need to do something first. He took the cup from her hand, placed it on the counter in front of her, put one hand to the back of her head, the other to her cheek, angling her face towards him, and kissed her. There was no gentleness to his kiss, no intimacy. It was hot, wanting, and demanding. His tongue invaded every part of her mouth in a way that would have made her knees weak had she not been sitting down. And she knew she was holding her breath, because if she didn't, the moans that would escape her throat would probably have been deafening. He ended the kiss and pulled his face back to look at her for a second, gave her one more quick peck on the lips, then released her. Right, now that's out of the way, we can address your other issues. He sat back down. Lee was silently trying to get her breathing under control, a little shell-shocked at what had just happened. So, let me get this straight, he confirmed. What you're saying is, although you like to spend time with me on a personal level, you see me as a different person when we're at work, and you don't like that person very much because he's too fussy, too demanding, and wants everything to be just right. Lee cleared her throat. Essentially, yes. Okay, but can I just ask a question here? Have you ever received a proof from marketing and it wasn't right, so you sent it back? Lee looked a little confused. Sometimes. And have you ever received a contract from legal but had to request changes to be made? From time to time, she answered, still unsure of where he was going with this. He drew his eyebrows together. I'm just a bit curious because why would you bother? Well, I don't do it for the sake of it or just to be awkward. I only send things back if they haven't done things the way I've asked, because if it's going out the door with my name on it, I want it to be... The penny dropped. I want it to be perfect. He feigned surprise. Really? How odd. Might I remind you, Natalie, that everything that goes out that door has my name on it, quite literally. But let me ask you another question. If a friend were to give you a birthday card but had misspelt something in it, would you give it back? She let out a deep breath and slowly closed her eyes. No. How about if another friend cooked you dinner but didn't present it on the plate the way you would have? Would you ask them to do it again? She slowly shook her head. Of course not, she said acceptingly, knowing exactly where he was going with this now. So what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, your expectations are different in your personal life than in your business one. Almost as if you were two completely different people, wouldn't you say? Stop looking so smug. You've made your point. Greg leant forward. I'm sorry, Miss Hyde. Did you say something? Lee half smiled. I'm nothing like you, she defended. He leant closer. Are you really so sure? She nodded. Positive. She sounded anything but. Greg shrugged. Well, there's really only one way to be certain. You need to spend more time with me, as friends initially, get to know me better, and then you will be in a position to make an informed decision. She knew she'd been outplayed. And when you say as friends initially, you mean... I won't say it'll be strictly hands-off, or lips-off for that matter, but there will be no sex involved, not until you're comfortable with both Jekyll and Hyde. You can't say that, Greg. You're talking for both of us, and I may not be quite so controlled as you claim you will be, which is why I've been running away from you for what feels like forever. Again, she refused to blush. He pulled her stool closer to him, resting his feet either side of her legs. Trust me, Angel, if I can make it through last night and your virtue is still intact, I can make it through anything you care to throw at me. It's time to stop running. He ran his fingers slowly through her hair, and Lee had to fight to stop her eyes from closing. She half smiled. You make that sound like a bit of a challenge, which I can't help but feel may have been your plan all along. Greg gave a small shrug. You've got to be in it to win it, Angel. His hand moved to her cheek, and he started caressing it with his thumb. Lee could no longer keep her eyes open, or her pulse steady. Why do you call me Angel? She said quietly. I told you last night, he whispered, very close to her mouth. You are too good to be true. You'd be surprised, she breathed. I doubt it, he managed to say before his mouth took hers again. Greg's tongue started its usual magic in her mouth, which she seemed to be able to feel all the way down to her toes, and she clung to his t-shirt for dear life. When he ended the kiss, he pulled back a little, his hand still on her face. "You're shaking again. Do I still make you nervous?" She gave half a laugh and opened her eyes and put a hand to his face. "Trust me, Greg, if you'd gone as long as I have without sex, and some hot guy was kissing you, you'd be shaking too." She loved how honest she could be with him right now. After so long of keeping her thoughts in check, it was so refreshing. Desire instantly covered his face. "Oh, that's just cruel to tell me something like that," he said through his teeth. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you? Have you decided to play mean?" A slight smile hit her lips. "I'm thinking about it." He cradled her to him with a chuckle. "I see a few cold showers in my future." He kissed the top of her head. "Have you at least decided to spend the day with me, though?" She had. She knew she had. But it still felt odd to accept it. "I just can't seem to get my head around going out on a date with Greg Phillips." He pulled back and looked at her. He ran his finger down her nose. "Keep telling yourself we met at a party and judge me with a clean slate." She squinted at him. "If we met at a party, you would ask me what I did for a living, and I would tell you what a manipulative bastard my boss was." He half shrugged. "Then there's your first advantage. You can save your breath. I already know what a manipulative bastard I am. But trust me, Angel, my bark's worse than my bite." He nipped the end of her nose with his teeth, making her giggle. "And look on the bright side," he continued. "I just might turn out to be the asshole you think I am. So at least then you'd know for sure." Lee's face brightened. "Oh, that would be wonderful. Alternatively," he looked contrite, "I may get to know you better and not like you very much." Lee rolled her eyes. "Yeah, right, like that could ever happen," she joked. He smiled, but his face turned serious. "You still take my breath away, Natalie Connor. Spend the day with me and give the bastard a chance to redeem himself. You'll only get one shot at this, you know. The second you criticize my lipstick for not matching my outfit or any of your usual shit, I'm gone." She smiled. He joined her smile. "Deal." "Okay," she let out a deep breath and straightened up in her chair, running her fingers through her hair. "I need to make a call, and though I assume my handbag is around here somewhere with my phone in it, I've no idea where, so can I just use yours?" She indicated the phone on the wall next to them. "Of course. There's a phone in every room, so use one of the others if it's personal." Lee knew he was asking if she was calling another man and smiled. "Not that personal." She got up and grabbed the phone. "More coffee?" he offered, getting to his feet. "Please," she accepted as she dialed Lucy's number. "Hi, it's me." "Fine. You?" "That's why I'm calling, darling. I can't make it today after all." Gregory filled the coffee cups and sat back down, his eyes going back to hers, and she was looking back at him. "No, not work." She tilted her head at him. "Just something has come up that I've been putting off for some time now, and I really need to deal with it." I know. Well, I'll call you tomorrow, and we can hopefully work something out for next weekend." "Oh, I won't waste your time with the boring details." Greg raised his eyebrows at her to indicate he was not happy being described as a boring detail. He pointed to his chest and mouthed the word boring at her, and she grinned. He got off his stool and came to her, moving her hair to one side, and started planting small kisses down the side of her neck. Lee put a hand to his chest to push him away, but he took her arm and held it behind her back, pushing her into the counter, his tongue moving up towards her ear. Lee had to hold her breath again to stop from groaning with pleasure, but her eyes closed all the while Lucy continued to talk, not knowing what was going on at the other end of the phone. Lee took a deep breath. "Look, darling, I'm going to have to go, but I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" Greg's lips were now on her face. "Okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, absolutely. Bye, sweetheart." His lips were now on hers and met no opposition. One of her arms went around his neck. The other was searching blindly to put the phone back in its cradle. Greg ran his hand up her arm and covered it with his own, guiding it to where it had to go, not releasing her mouth for a second. With both their hands now free, hers joined the other around his neck, while both of his fell to grab her bottom, raising her up onto the breakfast bar, pushing himself in tight against her, and Lee's legs wrapped around his waist, locking him in with her feet. Eventually, Greg pulled his mouth away, his breathing heavy. Yeah, you're right. This is boring. She half laughed, her breathing just as heavy. I'm bored senseless. He threaded his fingers into her hair. I'm not going to ask who you called. But, he smiled, clever girl. But you have to remember I am a little older than you. Yes, what century were you born in again? He blinked slowly and ignored her interruption. So I'm not so comfortable being involved in any sort of deception. Not that I'm going to walk away from it either, so don't misunderstand me. Now, I know you told me that there was nothing to the rumours about you and Paul, but we didn't get any further than that. And I guess I should have asked before, but to be quite honest, I had other things on my mind. But I'd like to know now, just for my own peace of mind, if I'm treading on anybody else's toes. She smiled. Oh, you're cute when you're being stupid. He raised his eyebrows. Is that right? Lee put a hand to his cheek. I'm the girl who just told you she hasn't had sex for what feels like forever, remember? He buried his face in her neck. It's burnt into my brain, believe me. And for your information, Mr. Phillips, she giggled, even at my tender young age, I too have rules about deception. He pulled back to look at her. Miss Connor, you have wisdom beyond your years. He lifted her back onto the stool and then sat back on his own, his legs going around hers again. So what would you like to do today, Angel? I have no idea. Did you have anything in mind? He raised an eyebrow. Plenty, but most of it I'm not allowed to do just yet. He cleared his throat and took hold of her hand. How about I take you to this lovely little country pub I know? We could grab a light lunch, and then we could come back here this evening and I'll cook for us. She half smiled. You said spend the day with you. I don't remember anything being mentioned about the evening. I'm just feeling sorry for you because you cancelled your weekend plans, he said innocently. How very self-sacrificing of you. She took a mouthful of her coffee. Can you even cook? He looked indignant. I'll have you know I'm quite handy in the kitchen. She leant forward and gave him a quick peck. I think you should let me be the judge of that. She stood up. Okay, well, I'm going to have to go home. He pulled her into him. No, you don't. She giggled. It may have escaped your notice, Mr. Phillips, but I have nothing to wear. He looked up at her with a grin. I like that in a woman. I'm sure you do. I won't be long. I'll come with you. He got to his feet. Lee grabbed his arm. You can't. Greg looked suspicious. Why not? Don't you live alone? Lee was shocked. Yes, I live alone. We've already covered this, haven't we? The reason you can't come with me is because Julie Taylor is my neighbour, and I could really do without having to explain your presence. That's all. He relaxed a little. Well, take my car then. Lee imagined herself pulling up outside her flat in his black Bentley convertible. Your car is about as noticeable as you are. I'll jump in a cab and be there and back in an hour or so. He put his arms around her. That's too long. Can't you just borrow a tracksuit or something, like we said? And that will look fabulous. Not only will it be 10 sizes too big, I only have black stilettos to finish it off with. He looked down at her. I resent the 10 sizes part. She smiled. Well, we'll soon see, because I do need to borrow something to get home. Lee came walking back into the living room in the promised tracksuit, rolled up at the ankles, waist and arms. Perhaps only 7 sizes too big, she concluded. Greg looked up from his desk. If I had my way, you'd still be in the robe. Where's your dress? She let out a deep breath. It died. I did mouth to mouth, but there was just no resuscitating it. I gave it a 2-minute silence and then buried it in your bathroom bin. It was a very emotional moment. He got up and stood in front of her, putting a hand to her face. You have my sincere condolences, he said seriously. Lee nodded. I appreciate that, thank you. He planted a quick kiss on her lips and went to walk away, but she grabbed his arm. The decision they'd come to was that Greg would drop her off at the end of her road, go and pick up a few things for their evening meal, and then pick her back up at the same place an hour later. Greg, I've just thought about a flaw in our plan. We'll have to walk past security and reception, and you just know they'll gossip. We'll have to leave separately somehow. Don't worry about it, Angel. I have another lift here that takes us straight down to the underground car park. Again he went to walk away, but she kept hold of his arm. What did you just say to me? She said accusingly. Greg closed his eyes and cringed, waiting for the onslaught of abuse. Are you telling me that you let me sit here last night, thinking I had no other option but to wait for everyone to leave, and all the while you knew that I could have left at any point? He held his hands up in front of him. In my defense, I never told you that there was no other options. You just didn't ask, and you can't blame me for playing the situation to my advantage. Lee shook her head. For someone who isn't comfortable with deception, that was a very deceitful thing to do. You've now lost any right you had to tease me about my behaviour last night, as anything that happened was entirely your fault. Greg hung his head in mock shame. I will accept my punishment like a man. Plus, she added, you do know you just scored minus points in the whole redeeming yourself clean slate thing, don't you? He cupped her face in his hands. I'll make it up to you, Angel, I promise. He kissed her lightly on the lips and led her to the lift. As Lee went to get out of his car at the end of her road, she turned to him with a smile. Are you sure you can cook? Ye of little faith, prepared to be amazed. She walked to her front door, smiling, thinking how she was never anything else with this man. Confused sometimes, speechless sometimes, irritated most of the time, but always, always amazed.